Imagine defying a king and changing an entire nation. Today you delve into one of the most touching and inspiring stories in Scripture, the story of Ruth. It is a story full of love, loyalty, and an unshakable faith that spans generations. If you've heard this story before, you know how much it can teach us. In a time of great difficulties, where hunger and uncertainty tormented the people, in this scenario we meet Naomi, a woman who loses everything but finds new hope in unexpected ways. His story, along with that of his daughter-in-law Ruth, is a powerful testimony to how faith and kindness can transform lives. To fully understand Ruth's story, we must travel back in time and explore the deep historical context in which it unfolds. Ruth was a young Moabite woman from the city of Moab. She was the daughter of Eglon, a descendant of Balak, king of Moab. Moab was a region inhabited by the descendants of Lot, Abraham's nephew. Ruth grew up in a pagan culture, worshipping foreign gods. Her story begins in a condition of pain and suffering within the family of Naomi and Elimelech, Jews living in a tumultuous period known as the time of the Judges. This era was marked by cycles of peace and conflict, where leaders called judges arose to guide the people in times of crisis. It was a time when everyone did what seemed right in their own eyes, leading to chaos and disorder. In this challenging and adverse scenario, we find Naomi and her family. A severe famine strikes the land of Israel, forcing many families to seek sustenance in foreign lands. Naomi, her husband Elimelech, and their 2 sons set out to build a new life in Moab, a place often hostile to Israelites. Moab was not just a foreign land, it was also a place with its own deities and cultures. For Naomi and her family, this journey was not only a quest for sustenance, but also a test of their faith and resilience. In Moab, Naomi, her husband Elimelech, and their 2 sons, Mahlon and Kilion, try to build a new life. Leaving their Bethlehem behind, they face the challenge of adapting to a new culture and faith. Naomi's sons married Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth. It is a moment of renewed hope for Naomi, who sees her family growing even in a foreign land. But destiny has other plans. Unfortunately, happiness is short-lived. Elimelech dies, leaving Naomi a widow. Soon after, his 2 sons also die. Naomi is left alone with her 2 daughters-in-law in a land that is not hers. She decides it is time to return to Bethlehem, her homeland. She advises her daughters-in-law to remain in Moab and rebuild their lives, knowing that in Israel, as widows and foreigners, they would face many difficulties. The journey from Moab to Bethlehem was not easy. The distance was about 80 to 100 kilometers over mountainous and challenging terrain. Naomi was willing to take this walk, but worried about her daughters-in-law's safety and future. She encouraged them, Ruth and Orpah, to return to their families. Orpah accepted, but Ruth chose to stay with Naomi. She uttered one of the most beautiful and well-known statements in the Bible: "Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God." And so Naomi and Ruth left together for Bethlehem, beginning a new journey that would transform their lives and ours. Let's follow this exciting journey and discover how God's providence manifests itself in surprising ways. The walk back to Bethlehem is full of challenges and uncertainties. United by pain and hope, Naomi and Ruth face each step with courage. When they arrive in Bethlehem, their presence does not go unnoticed. The women of the city are surprised to see Naomi, who previously left with her family, returning only with her Moabite daughter-in-law. In a moment of deep despair, Naomi expresses her bitterness. She asks to be called Mara, which means bitter, as she feels that the Lord has brought her back empty-handed. Naomi's sadness is palpable, but this is where the story begins to reveal its true beauty. Installed in Bethlehem, Naomi and Ruth face the harsh reality of poverty. As widows, they have few options for support. Ruth decides to take a bold step to support herself and Naomi. She finds work in the fields of a man named Boaz, who, initially unbeknownst to her, is a relative of Elimelech. Boaz soon notices Ruth and is impressed by her zeal and loyalty to Naomi. As Ruth works diligently in the fields, her dedication and humility do not go unnoticed by Boaz. He asks his servants about the young woman who gathers grain so earnestly, and upon hearing her story, Boaz is deeply moved. With a generous heart, Boaz instructs his servants to leave extra grain for Ruth and ensure her safety. He even invites her to share his meals, showing a kindness that exceeds expectations. God's providence begins to reveal itself in subtle but powerful ways. Ruth's encounter with Boaz is not mere chance but a significant step in the restoration of their lives. Let us follow how this relationship blossoms and transforms not only Ruth's life but also the future of the entire lineage she joins. Boaz's gesture of kindness is more than just generosity. It is a sign of God's providence in action. Boaz recognizes and values Ruth's loyalty and sacrifice and decides to protect and support her. But this is just the beginning of something much greater. The law of the kinsman redeemer allowed a close relative to marry a widow to preserve the family lineage. Although Ruth is unaware, Boaz is a potential redeemer for her family. When Ruth returns home with an abundant harvest, Naomi is surprised and pleased. Upon learning that Ruth has found favor in Boaz's fields, Naomi perceives God's guiding hand and begins to see a glimmer of hope for the future. Naomi advises Ruth to follow an ancient and courageous tradition. She instructs Ruth to approach Boaz at night when he is resting after a day's work. This symbolic act of lying at Boaz's feet would be a request for protection and marriage, something that requires immense courage and faith. With a heart full of determination, Ruth follows Naomi's advice. In the still of the night, she goes to the threshing floor where Boaz is sleeping and humbly lies at his feet, awaiting her fate. What happens next will change not only Ruth and Naomi's lives, but also the course of Israel's history. The night on the threshing floor is silent, except for the soft sound of the wind. Ruth, lying at Boaz's feet, waits anxiously. Boaz awakens from his sleep and, realizing there is a woman at his feet, is surprised. He asks, "Who are you?" Ruth replies with humility and courage, "I am your servant, Ruth. Spread your cloak over me, for you are a kinsman redeemer." This symbolic act represents a request for protection and a marriage proposal according to Israelite tradition. Touched by Ruth's courage and devotion, Boaz responds with kind words. He praises Ruth for her loyalty to Naomi and for not seeking young men, whether rich or poor, but a man of character. Boaz agrees to be her redeemer, but mentions that there is a closer relative who has the right of redemption before him. The act of spreading the cloak symbolized protection and the commitment to marriage, a significant cultural practice of the time. Being a just man, Boaz decides to resolve the situation legally to ensure everything is done correctly. The next day, Boaz goes to the city gate, where legal matters are discussed. He meets the closer relative and presents the issue of redemption. After explaining the situation, the relative declines the offer, allowing Boaz to take on the role of redeemer. With the matter settled, Boaz and Ruth can marry. Their union is not just an act of love, but also a symbol of redemption and hope for Naomi and Elimelech's lineage. The celebration of Boaz and Ruth's marriage is a moment of great joy. Naomi, who once felt bitter, now sees God's goodness restoring her life. And Ruth, a Moabite foreigner, becomes an integral part of the Bethlehem community. This wedding is not just a happy ending, but the beginning of something even bigger. Ruth and Boaz have a son named Obed, who becomes the grandfather of King David, one of Israel's greatest kings. For Naomi, this birth is a sign of complete restoration. Thus, the story of Ruth is deeply intertwined with the messianic lineage of Jesus Christ. Ruth, a foreign Moabite, becomes Boaz's wife and part of the lineage of Israel. The acceptance and love she found in Boaz reflect God's grace that transcends cultural and social barriers. Ruth and Boaz's life together is marked by a lot of work and faith. They build a life based on mutual respect and love, exemplifying the value of loyalty and trust in God. The book of Ruth is one of the few books in the Bible named after a woman, highlighting her importance and impact on her life. The inclusion of Ruth in Jesus' genealogy, recorded in the Gospel of Matthew, emphasizes that God can use anyone, regardless of their origin, to fulfill his purposes. Ruth teaches us the importance of being faithful to our commitments, kind to others, and trusting in God's providence, even when we can't see the way forward. God is working in our lives in ways we cannot imagine. Finally, Ruth's story is a powerful reminder that we all have a role in God's greater plan. Ruth, an outsider without great expectations, became a central figure through her vital contribution to the lineage of Israel's kings and the genealogy of Jesus Christ. This teaches us that regardless of our backgrounds or circumstances, we can be used in meaningful ways by God. If you liked this story, subscribe to the channel to receive more inspiring videos. Leave your like and share this message with your friends and family.